Yes? Okay. So we sell fuel. This is our station. A station is kind of like a place where traditionally you pull up, you buy fuel. There's really nothing digital about it. Circle K, arguably, was made famous in the 80s. So I'm a children of the 80s. I was a big fan of Bill and Ted. If you don't know what it is, it's
Strange things are afoot at the Circle K.
so arguably we were made famous in a movie, and that was shot in Arizona, one of our HQ stations, if you will. But nonetheless, what has a fuel retailer got to do with anything DevOps or digital, right? Like we should just focus on selling cigarettes and fuel. But if you go back to the turn of the century, a station actually looks very similar to what we have today. It has a pump, you go in somewhere, you pay for your petrol, and out comes some petrol. So arguably, our industry as a fuel retailer is quite dated. There is nothing digital about this. And in comes people like Tesla with their fancy charging stations and everything all digital. Literally, Circle K is freaking out right about now, right? So you can imagine, you can see out in the corridors, there's companies trying to build up IT competencies, to really bring a change in their organization. We're basically trying to do the same, except we're really pissing our pants when we see this. And it gets worse. Not just fuel is being disrupted. Now convenience, our hot dogs, and how you procure these hot dogs are also being disrupted. Things like Amazon Go. So what do we do instead of panicking? So that's kind of where I come in. For me, my message is very clear. Some people say, well, is there still a few years? Winter hasn't arrived. But no, those that watch not Lord of the Rings. Oh my gosh. Those who follow the show, the winter is already here. We have a final season coming. So doom is upon us. And what do we do? So I was hired in 2014. The top management realized we need to fix IT, and that was the mandate. So we need to fix it. It's very clear. It was quite vague. So we got to see a lot of things like this, like how do you do cost reduction, time to market, and some other random stuff. Mostly, for me, it's about flexibility and supporting new channels. You can see that some stations are different ways of paying. There's very many different ways to reach out to your customers digitally. It kind of made sense at the time, and I thought, well, let's just go with it. Fuck it. What have we got to lose? So we, IT, countered with a couple of tactics, and we came up with even more buzzwords and say we need to do innovation, we need to hire craftsmen, we need to do continuity, continuous integration, and all this super fancy stuff. And of course, you got to do agile. Nobody really know what that means, but I will tell you what it means in concrete terms by the end of today. But before we started, I thought IT is, well, our entire organization needs to do a little soul searching, right? So what is an enterprise IT? How do we get to where we are today? Like, we sell fuel, there's pumps, that stuff hasn't changed for 100 years. Why do we have legacies, and what does that mean? What does it all mean? So let's start with some facts. So my observation for Circle K at least, and I'm pretty sure this is the same for many other corporations, you're an enterprise IT if you have lots of meetings, lots of processes, you don't know why you do them, people just do them, and there's a lot of chefs. For example, there's 3 project managers and 1 developer. If you ever find yourself in that sort of situation, you are an enterprise IT, your company is in trouble, and there's not many cooks. So terrible. Fact number 2, when top management sets their mandates, it's buzzwords, right? Like it's like agile, innovation. There's nothing concrete about this. It's just literally buzzwords everywhere. And if you ever sit in a meeting and go, I literally don't understand what just been said, you work in an enterprise IT. But the buzzwords scene, if you will, doesn't really just plague the enterprise world. Like if you look at our favorite Kubernetes guy, he's kind of into his buzzwords as well. So yes, it is in the DevOps world. We all live in buzzwords, so we kind of just have to get used to it. And the sad facts, and this is the one that really hits home the hardest, is your existing IT investment or whatever portfolio you have is not going to go away. So again, if you've been to many other talks today, there's been sort of discussion about what do you do with the monoliths? How can you build microservices when those things exist? Don't you still depend on them? What do we do? Yes, they don't go away, and yes, they're still going to cost you a ton of money in 10 years' time. Fact number 4, and this is an interesting one. Yeah, we could all go out and start churning out lambdas and go super cloud native, right? We could do that, but your organization won't be able to support it. What does that mean for them? How fast can you turn this around versus how many meetings they want to have before you can launch something? So yes, if this is you work in enterprise IT like kind of we do. Fact number 5, if you do end up doing really cool cloud stuff, maybe new services, you're building microservices and APIs, you will at some point be dependent on data, and the data lives in the monoliths. Then that's extremely difficult. So you have this like duality, you have the new and the old, sort of the double dual era apps, we call them. How do you deal with that? Some people might even have several data centers, some in Amazon, some on-prem. What do we do? So for us, before we did anything, we had to look at our application portfolio. What did we have, actually? So without going into too many details, obviously we had our ERPs and CRMs and some mechanism to get paid and pay others. This is typically of what our monolithic, almost like a J2EE pattern, if you will, looks like. They normally have a very tightly coupled UI layer with a very tightly coupled business logic tier and some kind of integration. You've probably heard of the term SOA, and it's no difference. You do need to integrate. But when you do it in such a tight coupling, it's very difficult to tear them apart. So that's the challenge, really. We also find that configuration is at times baked into the application. There's no way to sort of extract the secrets, put them in Vault. A lot of our monoliths just literally username, passwords straight in. And that's terrible. Yeah, so don't go out and say we do that, but we kind of do. And the worst offenders is the ones that runs this type of system over a mainframe, very specific hardware is required. You're basically paying for like a really, really old computer. Yeah, it is totally not portable. So that's us in 2014. And very quickly I thought like, wow, we're completely screwed. Like this is just not gonna work. But lo and behold, I normally don't quote Gartner. I think they're very slow. But they did have a really nice way to explain things. And in your organization, you might find little pockets of people wanting to try new things out. And this is how you start building microservices, right? Like you go and explain it to them. Yes, we have this thing called system of records. These are the big monoliths, your ERPs, things you don't want to change. They just need to work. They're common ideas. My company will have one, your company will have one. You have probably what we call the system differentiation, things that makes you special today. Okay, whatever it is that you do today that makes you special, backed by a system, that's what we call the system differentiation. They're the better ideas, your unique processes, and hopefully no one else has copied them, right? And then you have your system innovation where maybe your sales and marketing really want to do something crazy. Like we want to do AI, we want to do chatbots, we want to da-da-da. Okay, we should do them. We group them as system innovation. And the interesting part is system innovation, if you go by all the conference talks today, they're basically microservices, right? They are your APIs that's going to support you, make you special for the future. That's your future competitive advantage. Pay close attention. So basically for me and for Circle K, we identified system of innovation, systems that don't yet exist. They will be built in microservice, and system of differentiation hopefully can be decoupled and also broken down. That's how we approached it. So essentially we piecemeal all the things. Right? You can't at times take out something huge. It's going to be super expensive and build 20 APIs. That's just not going to work. So in 2014, we looked in cloud infra because we had this lock-in with like Onprem. We didn't like many things about it. So we looked into Amazon and Google and Azure. We had three options at the time. We could decompose all existing application into microservices, which I mentioned is a really shit idea, sad faces. We can leverage continuous integration deployment and try to find some kind of flexibility and time to market, buzzwords, to address some of these new things, new activities that people wanted to do. And therefore, hopefully, we can start getting out of the mess we had in the past. To me, I think that's a very sensible approach. Of course, it's option 3. They are vendors that sells a platform that understands the mechanics of mixed era apps. I have no idea what that means, so I'm just going to put a smiley face and nod. But let's explore option 2. So earlier today, I gave a very detailed, technical deep dive about Jenkins and how we work with serverless. Unfortunately, this is more of a fun talk, but essentially it's the same. We want to continuously deliver stuff. We want to build little APIs. We want to decouple the UIs. We want to use Node.js. We want to have an opportunity to let our UX people work and design very, very cool things. So this is what we have today, and for our newer things. We have a bunch of APIs, we have a bunch of UIs, basically applications that are new. We, for now, would basically choose whatever persistence layer that fits the job. So we no longer just look at, oh, what does our CRM runs on, and let's just use that. No. We're going to pick what we want to do. And it's really, really straightforward when you use Elastic Beanstalk, for example. But of course, for on-prem, we decided with Kubernetes. At the time, Kubernetes was not sort of out of the box in Amazon, but I think it is out of the box 2 weeks ago, maybe. But that means we're shipping Docker containers. Now we can basically use our on-prem and AWS environment kind of the same way. Very, very different toolkits, but kind of conceptually the same. So we heard about self-healing applications with Kubernetes. I can say that may not be the case for us on-prem, but it's definitely the case for us in the cloud. So our decision, every decision needs to be backed up by something, right? Like, so if you need to explain why you need to do this, well, why Elastic Beanstalk? Well, for us at the time, now I probably will say, let's just use Kubernetes everywhere and federate all the clusters. But at the time, we thought the AWS Linux is basically a EC2 instance with Nginx bolted onto top of it with lots of tweaking in that Nginx. There's a lot of black magic with ELB, but we thought we'll deal with that. But that means we can deploy images or Docker files, which is nice. We like that. We also like the fact that it can elastically load, depending on how good your health checks are. And we see that as a highly available platform, or today I learned that's called self-healing. Yep. But essentially, we aim to have rolling updates and zero downtime, right? And the whole point of doing this is to maintain some level of service. But at the time, and some members of the audience probably still remember, that's worked with me, that we essentially hacked the crap out of that Nginx, and it just got really terrible. But we managed to get it to work. Why Kubernetes for on-prem? Well, when you deal with on-prem, there's a lot of legacy systems. I mean, one good argument is like it's Google, so it must be good. It's not built for a single vendor. It's community-driven. Today, Kubernetes comes out of the box in Amazon as a service or a platform or whatever, which arguably means that you can standardize how you ship applications, which is pretty nice. It does make good use of legacy hardware. It does. All the way it's built, the pods, it makes it pretty sweet. It too is elastic, horizontally scalable, depending on your hardware. And it kind of looks like this. So this kind of summarizes how we ship applications today. Previously, the old way, and you probably heard today also, you go and order a VM, it might come 6 months, 2 weeks, nobody knows. One single person has sort of installed everything and go, here you go. Go wild. Just don't break it. If you break it, you're not going to get another one for another 6 months. So previously, then application deployment kind of looked like, well, it's a change request, and I need to wait for the VMs to start. It may take 6 months, and then I go dump my binary magically there, and then via SSH, and then install everything. Not entirely sure what happens when a kernel updates. I pray to God that the application won't break. Terrible. But today, we ship containers that reuses the kernel space. So we could argue that we have the same testing setup as the production side. Why shouldn't it work? And of course, when you have Jenkins doing test automation, you are pretty certain that it's going to work. So for me, that's been a really, really good approach. And I think it was a really good approach for Circle K as well. For us, then, we kind of landed on the world of lack of orchestration. When you have a lot of Docker everywhere, what version of the binary should we install on which version of the Docker container and which version of, you need to orchestrate this. If you don't, this is bound to happen. So you do want to orchestrate somehow your Docker containers. So what do you need when you orchestrate, right? I mean, when you deploy and manage a bunch of servers, you basically, at times, and most of the times, you need to distribute the secrets. We talked about using vaults. HashiCorp has one. And of course, you can just homebrew your own, which is what we kind of have done. So our application team, in theory, never sees the secrets in production. We also, at the time, maybe we needed to mount storage and so on. That's kind of important when you run Docker. We had a terrible incident where we kind of just neglected how much stuff was being written to disk and everything died. But that was 2014. We don't do that mistake anymore. You should think about Elastic, how you're going to load balance this. So your API should be idempotent. It should be sort of stateless. So when you do orchestrate it, you can scale up or scale down. And therefore achieving auto-scaling, which is kind of nice. You totally should think about how you're going to have access and how you do logs. I mean, this is pretty straightforward stuff, so we don't need to go into too much details, and so on. But what the point here is that when you orchestrate a cloud-native application, it vastly differs from your monolith. And this is where your competitive advantage comes, right? Like you can very flexibly, very quickly launch something new. Provided you have your business counterparts understanding that, then I think you pretty much hit the sweet spots. Another thing we introduced as part of this, because when you start this, you wouldn't have too big of a team really, and you don't want too big of a team either. You want to try to have automation baked in to your culture. You want to do build pipelines. And today, build pipelines are the first-class citizens of Jenkins. So when we started, build pipelines was kind of this job DSL thing, plugin in Jenkins that was sort of gaining traction, but really people should be using Jenkins Job Builder. But today, there is this thing called Jenkins File. And in my previous talk earlier today, your application team can be in charge of their own build pipelines, having never to see whatever secrets or services that you're going to inject. But anyway, what it does is provides a repeatable and automated and a very visible platform, and that's the key. Like, if you want to upsell this stuff, you want to make it visible for when you ship applications. Green lights actually means quite a lot for people. Anyway, for us, we always do test automation, static code analysis, and we bootstrap infrastructure from time to time. One interesting note, one learning in 2014 was when you start to sort of transform an IT organization, the terms QA, test, prod, dev, all have different meanings, right? You have these jargons that are baked into your previous organization or the old one that is very, very difficult to come to an agreement and what that truly means. For us at the time, we just decided to screw it, we just call it a completely different thing so we know what it means and people just have to kind of, match it to their own understanding. So at the time, we had this idea of kitchen or tests. Like, we're shipping plate of food. It's a bit like Gordon Ramsay. You go in the kitchen, you chop everything up, you prep it, and then you put it to shop. Shop for us was production. One side note, I think packaging is still very important, even if we use Docker. I still believe that everything should be packaged, and I firmly stand by that statement. I think it just makes installing stuff and upgrading and doing dependency management so much better. Otherwise, you're literally, otherwise you're basically writing this Docker entry sh, right? Like, you're basically cooking up your own version of, what it should have been. Anyway, big fan of Cloud B. Not as active in the community, but nonetheless, big fan of Jenkins. So we use Jenkins for a lot of things. For launching into our test environment or our kitchen test environment, for making sure everyone's doing the same thing. We run a lot of static code analysis. It's no-brainer. We don't run Selenium tests. I don't like Selenium. I don't know why this is in this picture, but it is. We don't do performance tests this way either, because I think nowadays you do want like a true performance test. You really should be scaling up and scaling down, and you may script this, and to have Jenkins spinning up instances just feels really strange. Of course, source code and Nexus for the security conscious people. But when you do this in your own organization, it might start from a whiteboard, right? Like, you sit down, you think about what apps you're going to build, what APIs you're going to ship, and it all starts from here. The people that you work with, with Jenkins file particularly, and being able to spawn Jenkins and Docker, for example, locally on your laptop, it also means that you can test your build pipeline. So that's a really good nifty trick. I don't know, like often we see like terrible commits. That's there to like, oh, I screwed up this YAML spacing, and you get like 20 commits just like super angry at yourself. But then if you test it out, you don't have that embarrassment. At least that's what I do. But yeah. But which also means when you can test a build pipeline, regardless what it's doing, right? Like whether it's doing a Git clone, whether it is packaging something, or doing a Docker build, or I don't know, using Packer, you can test your build pipeline now with the local Jenkins. And that's a point I'm trying to drive home, which I think is quite interesting, that automation, if used correctly, could do everything that you ever wanted. So I highly recommend it, and then this is quite an easy upsell. Like those that recognize what this notation is, called BPMN. It's a very enterprise-friendly thing, so people apparently knows this. So if you draw it like this, people will get it like, oh yeah, this is a very good business process. It's like Zoa, but no. But it just means you test your build pipeline. So we talked about build pipeline in the organization. We sort of talked about how we build application. I think that's very interesting. I believe, and firmly believe, you should avoid using the UI for Jenkins. You should be using DSL, any kind of DSL, job DSL, or the Jenkins file variant, or or the job builder YAML version, to describe your jobs, right? So that it is repeatable, testable, no one is clicking around, and so on. And avoid having too much secret injected into Jenkins. Ultimately, what I believe one should use Jenkins for is for the dashboard, actually. Just to plaster it on the wall and makes you feel good inside when everything is green, and you're happy. So there is an example. I don't know if I pasted a link. No, it's in my other talk. But anyway, if you go to my GitHub repo, there's this thing called the Jenkins and Docker in 2 steps. You basically go vagrant up, and you go vagrant run whatever, fire up the Jenkins, and you have a Jenkins. In that repository, there's also a seed job written in Job Builder. And if you read the README, you will and just follow it, you will create a seed job that will pull down a repository containing where other application or source code will live, and inside those Git repositories will live Jenkins files. So that means you can scale out. What that truly means is you can have different application teams in charge of their own build process. Right? You don't have to follow a standard here. If I don't want to package, I put that in my Jenkins file, and then my build pipeline will just skip that step, basically. So I write it as I like it, based on application. But for the sysadmins, it means that all they need to do is pull down a bunch of Jenkins files and a source code and trust that you know what you're doing in terms of build pipeline and just let it roll. This is what it used to look like 6 years ago, but now there's this thing called Blue Ocean. I have no idea what it really looks like, but it looks very, very fancy. I hear that a lot. But at the time, and this actually wasn't for Circle K, but all the green lights made everybody feel very, very nice and warm inside, and it was just a very, very good feeling when you launch products. And if you can achieve this, have it in a big screen like here, I think you will feel very good also. So just to quickly recap, when you transform or whatever it is you want to do, get out of monoliths or build new applications, start small. Start with things that somebody really truly wants that you believe also will be the next competitive advantage. Make that your flagship microservice and build more services around that service. So basically that's it. And one day you'll come back to your monolith, and because the cost is so high, somebody will push for a change there as well. And then use Jenkins, because you will have a small team. You don't want people to manually do things. You want to automate. And I think that's essentially the heart of the recipe here. But we had at one stage some ChatOps in our Slack. I built this bot that could rebuild our entire Docker image collection. I don't know why I did it. I don't think it's very useful. But then it was fun to do. And I think the opportunities is quite a lot. If you could have monitoring, status updates as Slack commands, not necessarily tearing things down, because that's kind of scary. But more sort of read-only data coming in through Slack, your entire team will see it. And I think it's quite an effective way to work. And we use a lot of Docker, so it's kind of a old picture. So since 2014, Circle K, we have this notion of tribes and digital products. We give them nicknames. We hire new people. So for us, DevOps is about some kind of culture, right? You probably have heard this at least three, 4 years ago. DevOps is not a position. DevOps is just a term. DevOps is culture. And I myself fully believe in that. I'm doing really good for time, actually. Didn't have to go into too much Bill and Ted. So our findings, to summarize, fairly complex deployment between cloud native and on-premise, and this is still the case today. If you take how we do updates in some of our on-prem stuff, and if you imagine and remember that is the system of records that shouldn't really change and you don't want to change them, they are still very much driven by, like an ITIL process. You need to put change requests here, somebody's going to hit a button there, and then somebody will approve something else there. Very difficult to get out. However, being able to categorize that process differently from our more innovative services means that our innovation is not being hampered by this kind of bullshit, which is very good. Monitoring and logging is hard. We have integration to a lot of things on-prem. At some point, you won't be able to get in and get out the information that you need to debug the problems you're having. Monitoring is hard when you have a multi-era setup. I think today, Victor said it really nice, that we add layers upon layers upon layers of stuff just to feel like you're changing things. And that's very, very true, and that is a real risk. And the impact and the outcome of this, that you won't be able to debug anything. It's really, really terrible. So you really have to buckle down and be really strict on introducing new layers where things should change. If an innovation application or services requires a different, let's say, integration endpoint in your ERP, let's say, you should demand that to happen instead of building yet another layer to wrap around what's already a terrible setup. And you want to be able to debug very, very quickly. Yes. And then there's this how small is a microservice discussion, right? Like what is a micro, what isn't, what is, yeah. I think just have common sense. That's it. Don't do what Spotify did. Everyone use Spotify here? Yeah. The top right corner, when you have a notification, a number or something, that's one single microservice that they host. I think that's way too small. I think it's a bit unnecessary as well. And I think they have changed it as well, but yeah, common sense. And while you're doing this process, and this is how we're seeing it as well, that your monolithic dependencies will drag you down and you need to be strong. Another thing we've noticed that, and I think this is a super fun aspect of it, like in my talk earlier, I was essentially using a very large spectrum of tool sets, which I find very, very fun. So then your developers will hopefully do the same and find it very interesting. Our last finding is an interesting one. Should you Docker everything? Yes? No? We have a maybe. How many says yes? Yeah, good, very good. What about database? That's a no, obviously. Okay, we have maybe, no, yes. No is the correct answer for me, for Circle K. So you should approach this sensibly, right? Like, don't just, because there's a hype, don't just follow everyone. Just have a think about what it is you want to scale, how you want to scale it. It's a lot to do with how your application behaves and how you want to scale that horizontally. So don't go Dockerizing everything. One key example is putting like Wildfly in a Docker. Feels really nice. You won't be able to scale, okay? Because you need to bake in the IP addresses of another cluster. Stuff like that just does not work. And IP addresses changes in the cloud, right? So, okay. So ultimately, if we follow the path we're following today, should we piecemeal cloud native apps and build pipelines and do ChatOps, and that means we'll win in 2018 maybe? Almost, I think, in my opinion, almost. I think this is a journey that will continuously improve. We're constantly improving, at least finding out ways to improve our infrastructure and the code surrounding the infrastructure, in the cloud at least. So it's definitely an ongoing process. It should never end, and innovation should never stop. So, Kubernetes and Elastic Beanstalk, no matter how many conferences you go to, will not solve the fact that you have shitty applications. That's the absolute bottom line. If you don't fix those applications, it will not disappear. You will still be paying for them. And DevOps for us, for me, is culture. So my very, very last summary slide. Strange things are definitely happening in Circle K. A very, very strange positive change is happening in Warsaw. And this will be the first time this will be live, I believe. And I made a little video. So to summarize, without changing your enterprise, you will never get here, and we're very happy that we are there. Thank you.